Morning, everyone. It's Elsa Rayburn here. I'm the chair of Community Land Scotland and the chair of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust. It's really nice to see so many people today on screen, and thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it on this our 10th anniversary and our celebration event, and I think we all wish we could be together. I think of the last 9 CLS conferences, everyone has been in the sunshine, and it's such a shame we're not able to be together, but it's lovely to see all your faces on the screen. We've got a really great range of speakers today, and we're planning on running until 12 o'clock, and we will finish at 12 o'clock, so even if I have to cut my own blurb at the end. So the speakers we've got are some old faces that some of you will know, and some new faces. We've got a really packed agenda. Our first speaker, David Cameron, one of the founders of Community Land Scotland, and he's very instrumental today still in keeping us on track. He's a real visionary, and he's got some really interesting to say to you. Next, after that, I'm pleased to say we've got the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, Rosanna Cunningham. As this is going to be, sadly, her last speech to a CLS event, we're really looking forward to some of her personal reflections on Scotland's land reform and community ownership journey and where the future might go. And we've also just been having a quick chat saying how great it is that she's able to be with us today when funding's been announced for so many fantastic Scottish Land Fund projects across Scotland. And then I have to say we have the real face of the community landowning movement next, Maggie Fife from Egg. Maggie's got global fame for community ownership, and as I work with her on a regular basis as the chair of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust, I have to say Maggie really does know where all the bodies are buried. And she's going to be joined by Lucy Conway, also from Egg, who's currently on the exotic climes of the Caledonian Canal, coming in by phone, which is fantastic. We appreciate that. Thank you, Lucy. Lucy's and Maggie and the team there are working in some really big projects and moving Egg into their 3rd decade of community ownership, so it's very exciting. We've then got a panel session which Agnes Rennie from Golson is going to chair, and a real range of contributors there, from Caitlin Mcneill on Colin, who's one of our youngest directors, and Megan McInnes from the Land Commission, and Colin Mcleod and Martin Avila from Kinning Park. So I think that should be a really good discussion. We've then got a film that we've been working on, which is also starring one of the new stars of community land ownership, Sky Layla from One Lockhead. So I really urge you to stay and watch that. She's fantastic. Then very exciting section, Bring Your Own Cake Day, much more interesting than bring your own dog to work or bring your child to work. So bring your cake to work. So I hope everybody's got a cake to hand. And then finally, we're going to finish up with a couple of our newer members delivering some really exciting projects in the south of Scotland and Glasgow, Nith Valley and View Park. And as I say, we're planning on finishing at 12 o'clock. So we've got a chat function. So if there are any questions as we go along, then please put them in the chat box, or if there's any issues, and we'll pick them up as we go through. We're also recording the session, so if anyone doesn't want to be recorded, if you could let us know, or switch your video off. And we're always plugging Community Land Scotland. If anyone wants to become a supporter, there's details on the screen or on our website. That would be great. So we're going to crack off. I'm going to pass over to David first, and David's pre-recorded a video for us, just to make sure that the connections and everything works. So I'm going to pass over to Kerry to play that video from David.
Thank you, Elsa, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to have this time together to recognise the 10th anniversary of Community Land Scotland. And for the next few minutes, I'd like really to reflect where we've come from. And I use that word "we" to include our partners, many of whom will have logged on here this morning. The existence of Community Land Scotland and the work we do is rooted well before 2010. And we're merely just one step on the long journey of properly combining land ownership and the people who live and work in that Scottish land. I could go back to 1883 and the Napier Commission, which led to the 1886 Crofters Act. That's where we've come from. I could go back to Glendale in 1908, the Land Settlement Act of 1919. I could go back to the Stornoway Trust, 1923. All these were other steps along the way. I think that Community Land Scotland and its present partners can be justly proud of being part of that story, a story which is centuries old and one that still has a long, long way to go. The work we're doing today can really be shown to have started with the Ascent Crofters in 1992. Then it was followed by Egg, Noidert and Gea. These 4 purchases were done by people who felt their communities were on their knees, even on the way out. And if they didn't do something for themselves, they would likely join the many empty islands and empty spaces across Scotland. There followed a number of others at the Galston Estate in Lewis, the North West Mall Community Woodland, North and West Harris. And that was because from these areas we saw opportunities for our own communities from what was being done in these earlier land purchases. Something really magic was happening in these areas. Latent energy was being released within the communities and transformational changes were underway. However, even with the 2003 Land Reform Act, by about 2009, several people felt the steam had gone out of the movement, and there was danger of what we saw as a really great Scottish success story was coming to an end. We were the political pop of the late 1990s and the early years of this century, and we really didn't want that to happen. Following a small meeting in Inverness, Highlands and Islands Enterprise offered to fund a gathering of community landowners and others to discuss the situation across the sector. This led to a meeting in Tarbert Harris, where after what probably can be described as a very good, robust debate with stakeholders, the 17 community landowners voted unanimously to investigate the value of an umbrella organisation. And we were then charged to come back to High with a properly worked out feasibility study. The following year, in 2010, it's actually 9 years and something like 50 weeks ago, in Eden Court Theatre in Inverness, Community Land Scotland was formed with 17 members. 16 had already signed up and we got an extra one on the day itself. High again took a risk and supported us for our first 3 years. Community Land Scotland has restored a belief that ordinary people from all across Scotland in many rural and urban communities have the potential and are growing in confidence to change their own lives. That belief is now accepted by all political parties, civil servants, local governments, academics and researchers, the Scottish Land Commission, funders and others. Community Land Scotland and its members are built on a bottom-up approach. Transparency and honesty in action and opinion. As an organisation, we've always worked with others where there's overlap, but we've also retained the position of saying that we have a different opinion to our fellow travellers. We're built on passion. Nowadays, there is the need for dotting I's and crossing T's, which at my age I regret a bit, but we have adapted to do that. But still, we and our members are driven by that passion that you see in community after community. People doing things for themselves. Long may that continue, and with a fairer, more balanced Scotland based on further land reform, there will be many, many more steps, a new opportunity for communities to continue this story. Many thanks, and then I'll pass back to Ailsa.
I have to say it's an absolute pleasure to serve with David on the board of Community Land Scotland, and not that we need much reminding, but he constantly reminds us of that original vision. It's now my pleasure to introduce Rosanna Cunningham, MSP. Rosanna's a Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, and she's the first Scottish Cabinet Secretary to have a portfolio title that specifically references land reform, and so the connections between Ms Cunningham and Community Land Scotland over recent years have been strong and important. We've greatly welcomed the strong support for community ownership as one dimension of land reform that the Cabinet Secretary has given over her time in office. And we also welcome her support for the Land Fund, which has been so vital in helping to meet community aspirations, and also her support for the Scottish Land Commission in helping with the necessary change in the land laws of Scotland and improving land management practices. The Cabinet Secretary has rightly, in our view, made clear there's still much to do on the land reform agenda and that the story of land reform in Scotland is far from over. Although she's indicated she will not be seeking re-election in 2021, we know her interest in land reform long predates her time as Cabinet Secretary, and as she moves to life after elected office, we hope her interest will continue, and who knows, we might even seek to recruit some of her time in the future to help our continuing cause. Cabinet Secretary, we really thank you for all you've done over recent years to support land reform and support Community Land Scotland, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say to us today on our 10th anniversary. So I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Right, and can I just say thanks very much for the invitation to speak at this milestone conference. I mean, it's hardly believable that it was only 10 years ago that just 17 community landowners came together to start work on establishing CLS to boost community land ownership. And that's 10 years at the forefront of the land reform movement, and that's an impressive achievement. And obviously, I think, from my perspective, CLS was set up for three reasons: to be the representative voice of community landowners, to help community landowners share knowledge and best practice, but also, I think importantly, to raise awareness of the benefits of community land ownership in the whole of Scotland. And the first conference took place that year. I think I was I at that one? No, yes, I was at that one. I think that was, I think I was at that one. Since then, the Community Land Scotland has been an independent voice of land reform and community ownership, and it's really important that the community land ownership voice is heard, because, as I've often said, landowners are landowners are landowners, and obviously there are different kinds of landowners, but at the end of the day, land ownership is what brings them all together, and it would have been absolutely ridiculous for the community land ownership side of things not to have had that clear representation that CLS has given it. The fact that its members, represented by the board, have achieved so much has meant that they've actually been able to bring a very practical angle to their work. They've not been afraid to be radical and challenge the status quo, and I think that's really important, and I for one welcome it. By exporting the whole success of the Highlands and Islands communities, it has encouraged and supported the ambitions of urban and south of Scotland communities to take their future into their own hands too. And that's been a really important part of the debate in the last few years. And since 2010, Community Land Scotland has played an important role in helping to contribute to and shape the policy landscape on land reform. And a lot has happened in the last 10 years. In 2014, Community Land Scotland led on developing the Buntrue Declaration, which explored land reform in Scotland within an international context, with particular reference to the achievement of greater social justice and the realisation of human rights. And I know from speaking to my counterparts in other countries how fascinated they are by the land reform movement in Scotland. First, of course, because it's a land reform movement in a developed part of the world, which they find interesting, but also because it does provide for them a potential model for perhaps looking at how they might proceed in their own countries. And in 2015, CLS joined the International Land Coalition, spoke at the Global Land Forum in Dakar. I bet that's not what they were thinking about in 2010, perhaps when they were first setting up. The following year, they recruited a development officer, Lindsay Chalmers, whom I'm sure you all know, to help raise awareness of community land ownership and help communities share information. And that same year, they held their first awareness raising sessions in the south of Scotland. And this year they've started work on a pilot urban community land hub, which aims to continue to promote and assist with community ownership in urban areas, learning from the experiences of rural communities. And I'd also like to think that the Scottish Government has helped a little during those 10 years as well. Two key acts of Parliament have embedded land reform and community ownership into the legislative fabric of our country. The Community Empowerment Act of 2015 extended the right to buy to urban communities, and I think that was very important. It gave the opportunity for communities to take forward a compulsory purchase of abandoned and neglected land. It gave communities the right to ask public bodies to transfer assets into community ownership, and I know that has been happening right across the country. The Land Reform Act of 2016 went further still. It gave communities the right to purchase land to further sustainable development. It introduced the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement to signal our intent to embed land reform and community ownership into the day-to-day thinking of everyone. It created the Scottish Land Commission to ensure that land reform remained on the agenda into the future and was not something that we considered finished. And I think the creation of the Scottish Land Commission has also been a landmark in Scotland's land reform debate. And in addition, as has already been pointed out, land reform is now firmly embedded in a ministerial title, and it's one that I have been very proud to hold at Cabinet Secretary level. And during that whole time, the Scottish Land Fund has gone from a £1 million fund to a £10 million fund, and applications from community groups are coming in at an increased rate. We've given an unwavering commitment as part of our community empowerment and land reform work to support groups across Scotland to tap into the potential resources around them. And through land and asset purchases, local communities are helping tackle the inequalities of land ownership and the democratic deficit that afflicts so many of our communities, who are often excluded from participation in decision-making about their locality. And the support for the government's land reform agenda from organisations such as Community Land Scotland is invaluable. Events like this, which bring together communities, practitioners, support organisations, policymakers, do ensure that the land reform journey is mapped out and taken forward. And more communities are taking ownership of land and assets. The Scottish Land Fund has, as everybody is probably aware, just today announced that 22 new community owners have been given almost £2 million of awards to start them on that journey. And the variety of assets that groups are now taking into community ownership is very encouraging. The latest awards see the likes of Blairgowrie and Rattray Development Trust seek to develop a walled garden as a community garden. It sees Rannoch Community Trust take over the outdoor centre to convert it to a community hub for the community, visitors and tourists. It sees a group in Inverall taking ownership of woodland from Forest and Land Scotland to use as a community resource for walks, education and the promotion of local wildlife. And these three examples, I think, show the variety of assets that communities can own and the imagination that communities can bring to their future use and prosperity. And this round of awards has also seen the 200th group take ownership of an asset since the fund was formed. North Edinburgh Arts was awarded a grant of over £150,000 to buy and develop a community space which will include a cafe, business spaces and shared making spaces from which people can try out new ideas and learn in a cooperative environment. And although it seems like only yesterday, that's still only 18 months since the 100th group took ownership of the Pyramid at Anderston in Glasgow, which I was happy to visit at the time. So that shows the increasing pace at which communities are looking at this as a potential way forward. And both the last two that I've mentioned, of course, are in urban areas. And I'm very pleased to see that the message is beginning to reach urban Scotland. There's a lot more to be done to encourage others to follow their lead. And I know that Community Land Scotland will be very much involved in that work. That's a clear indication that the desire for community ownership is increasing at a rapid rate. Those groups value the support of CLS in taking their initial steps and beyond to contribute to the economic, social and environmental well-being of their own communities and the country as a whole. At the end of last year, a total of 590 assets were in community ownership, and more than half of those have taken ownership since Community Land Scotland was formed. Over the last 20 years, there's been an almost six-fold increase in the number of communities who own assets. And maintaining that momentum is vitally important. The government has committed to continuing the Scottish Land Fund, which has been such a valuable source of funding for communities looking to own assets. We've also asked the Scottish Land Commission to advise on options for communities to complement funding from the Land Fund with other funding approaches in order to ensure land and asset ownership is a normal option for communities. And I encourage CLS to get involved in that work. We can all see that when we emerge from the COVID crisis, that whole pandemic, the extraordinary year that we've been through, we can all see that there's going to be a need for change, of finding new ways of doing things better and learning from the lessons of COVID and how communities were able to respond. So the Community Land Scotland sponsored work around built-in resilience demonstrated to us all the strengths and capabilities that do lie among Scotland's community landowners and how they can help us build a fairer, greener Scotland. And that maps right across into the other parts of my portfolio. So land reform doesn't just sit there out on its own, it's integral to the other parts of my portfolio as well. I hope that Community Land Scotland will continue to be the radical voice for the rights of communities and push for further land reform to help us all make Scotland a fairer and greener society. As you have already referred to, I don't intend to stand in the elections next year. Although my time as Cabinet Secretary will be coming to an end at that point, my decades-long commitment to land reform will not. So I'll be interested to see where Community Land Scotland and its inspiring and ambitious members go next. Land reform is a work in progress. There are no shortage of big issues to be dealing with. Enabling communities to benefit more from Scotland's natural capital, addressing the issues of rural depopulation and shortage of affordable housing, and addressing the continued concentration of land ownership. But I am confident that we have the skills and ingenuity within our community landowning sector to address these. So I really hope that this pace that has been increasing over the last few years continues to increase over the next number of years. So I thank you once again, and I wish you every success in the future.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. It's difficult to have a round of applause, but I think whoever can show their thanks to you by a round of applause. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today, and thank you for that inspiring speech. It's great to sometimes we forget just how much has been achieved when you've got your head down and in the middle of it. You do need to look back and see what's happened.
I think that's true. I think that's very important, and sometimes when things are perhaps a little bit difficult, or you're having to think through some unexpectedly difficult issues, it is worth remembering the enormous progress that has been made, and I expect will continue to be made. As I said, land reform is definitely a work in progress. I don't see any full stop at the end of any sentence that land reform is part of.
Well, that's good to know. Well, thank you again for your time today. Hope you have a good rest of the day, and we look forward to being in touch with you again soon and sending you some more good news.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're now going to move on to how one island inspired a nation, and over to Egg and to Maggie, who is on Egg, and Lucy, who is in some undisclosed location somewhere. So we'll pass over to Maggie and Lucy, and really look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Good morning, everybody. Egg, 12 miles offshore, around 4 by 6 miles in total, beautiful beaches, farmland, heath and woodland, and of course people. 50 years ago, Egg was little known, but that all changed in 1975 when Keith Schellenberg, businessman, racing driver and sportsman, bought the island. At first he made a good impression. He brought several young families to the island who boosted the declining population, established an estate farm, a craft centre and a holiday business. But disillusionment quickly set in. With business run in a chaotic manner, there was a high turnover of staff, no one had a contract of employment or a lease on the house or business. With no available independent housing or alternative employment, folk faced the prospect of leaving Egg or moving into a caravan and making ends meet by picking whelks, which several families did, of course. 1991, a group of people concerned about land ownership formed the Isle of Egg Trust, brought their ideas to the island for our consideration. Many meetings later, residents voted in favour of supporting their aims, but it's interesting to note that at this stage we were still looking to others to take the lead. May 92, following a court case involving his ex-wife and part owner, Schellenberg was forced to put the island up for sale. Interest had been shown by the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Highland Council in forming a consortium with the community, but time and funding were in short supply and we were unable to prevent Mr. Schellenberg from buying out his ex-wife's share. Promised leases never materialised. The lack of employment, the lack of security, the island became more and more depressed. The community slowly began to find its voice, and a community buyout became a major topic of conversation. Confidence was still lacking, but community meetings became more frequent, more focused, and we slowly built a picture of priorities and how we'd like to see the island develop. A new shop, for instance, as the current one had no running water or electricity. 1994, the final straw came when 2 families were threatened with eviction. That was the day the community made it clear that they would never allow that to happen, and something had to change. It did change, although not how we had envisaged. We woke up one morning in March 95 to find the island had been sold to a mysterious German artist who called himself Maruma. Maruma owned Egg for 2 years, during which time he visited Egg for a total of 4 days and never once replied to the many faxes we sent him. Once it was reported that he was being investigated for fraud and the remaining estate employers didn't receive their wages, we knew the game was up. It became obvious to all that we could definitely do better than do nothing at all. July 96, we discovered the island was about to be put on the market. As the community had already established a partnership with the SWT and Highland Council, we were able to hastily formulate plans for the launch of a fundraising appeal and started work on an application to the Heritage Lottery Fund, which we imagined would provide 50% of the purchase price. Remember, there was no land reform legislation or land fund at that point. Cheques and pledges came flooding in, including a pledge of $500,000 from an anonymous benefactress. As the closing date in November approached, hopes were dashed when the lottery turned down our application. But on hearing this news, our benefactress upped her pledge to £1 million, which allowed us to submit a bid of £1.2 million, which was based on an independent valuation and all the money we had. We soon learned that our bid had been turned down as it failed to reach the highly inflated asking price of £2 million. We were disappointed, of course, but we carried on fundraising over that winter, and by the following March we were ready to submit a further bid of £1.5 million. That's when a stroke of luck happened and Maruma defaulted on a loan and his creditors took over the sale. 4th of April 1997, in the company of our legendary lawyer Simon Fraser, our offer was accepted. Panic set in, of course, because we had only 2 minutes to redeem all the pledges, but we needn't have worried. The money all arrived and more besides. And it's worth noting that apart from £17,000 grant from HIE, all the money we raised was from 10,000 members of the general public. June 1997, 12th of June 1997, and around 400 folk, politicians, musicians, family and friends from near and far, braved the wind and rain to join us to witness our eldest residents, Dougal and Dolly, unveiling the memorial plaque, and obviously to have the biggest party that Egg had ever seen. Of course, for the population of only 64, that was just the beginning.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you,
Hooray!
Lucy.
Thank you. I'm Lucy Conway. I'm Lucy Conway, and I'm currently on the Caledonian Canal, so hence not knowing if you can see me or not. I came to Egg in 1996, and I fell for the people and the place, and we moved here in 2004. I've been a director of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust for 3 years, following on the footsteps of more than 40 other directors elected by island residents. Since the buyout, the population has grown from that 64 that Maggie mentioned to over 110 people. Some of them are new, like me, but half of whom are people who were there at the buyout in 1997 or were children 23 years ago, and they now have families and homes and businesses of their own. Since 1997, the commitment and stamina and the sheer will that saw the buyout happen has remained, and the desire to make Egg the best place to live, to work and to thrive is embedded deep in the soul of everyone who lives here. We're not an intentional community, but a fairly random group of extremely individual people who, while we disagree in a lot of things, we all love Egg. But loving Egg isn't enough. Love isn't enough in its own. Love isn't going to get piers built or renewable energy companies created. Love is in every brick of Anlamrig, the first building that the Trust built 1 year after the buyout, to house the island's tea room, craft shop and public toilets, and the egg shop that Maggie was talking about. Love, of course, plus hours and hours of meetings, new skills learned, old skills applied, and huge faith backed by ever-present pragmatism and a lot of hard work. In 1997, Egg folk knew what they needed to help their island thrive. They needed people, they needed security, infrastructure, and stewardship of Egg's precious natural and cultural resources. 23 years on, Egg has 10 homes for social rent, 3 tenanted farms, 20 crofts, a refurbished community hall, primary school and nursery, and high-speed community broadband. Plots of trust land have been made available to either buy outright or on a shared ownership basis, enabling 7 families to build their own homes. New homes for social rent are also planned, including the conversion of the old NHS surgery and a new build on the land adjacent. Woodland and peatland have been restored, a croft museum and archive created by Egg's History Society, Fish Egg and Howling Fling added to Egg's cultural patchwork of events. In 2008, Egg Electric generated power from wind, water and sun for the first time, providing electricity 24/7 to residents' homes and businesses. Egg Electric and other low-carbon innovations saw Egg win Nesta's Big Green Challenge and the prestigious Ashton Award. In just over 10 years, Egg had become the inspiration for community land and community energy projects around the world. And now we're in 2020 in all its oddness, but a pandemic won't stop the ambition and drive of the Egg. Our tree nursery has over 20,000 trees grown from island seed to create new woodland and to replant over 11 hectares of timber that were harvested last year. The Trust's new wood fuel business continues to provide work and generate income, even if our visitor camping pods sit empty. Phase 1 of a £3 million project to redevelop the old original Anlamrig building starts this autumn, with a new new toilet and shower block, improvements to the water supply and wastewater management. Egg Electric is also expanding to enable existing and new businesses that will move into Phase 2, which is the renovation and expansion of Anlamrig, with no impact on the rest of the island's capacity to do the same. COVID hasn't stopped islanders' own businesses. Kildonan Bay oysters are nearly ready to harvest. Lost Map Records has a roster of nearly 30 international artists producing physical and digital releases and events. And Egg Brewery is about to launch a community share offer, making it Scotland's first community-owned brewery with plans to invest 25% of its profits into island entrepreneurship. These businesses, these people, these families have all put their eggs in the Egg basket. They've invested time, money and ambition into Egg. They see their future here, confident that they found a place to call home, a place that they feel part of, a place that they can make better. It's exciting, exhilarating to live somewhere you can make a difference. Yes, there's a sense of responsibility, but it sits fairly lightly on directors' shoulders. We have good partners to work with in the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Highland Council, financial and moral support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise and others. But at the end of the day, we're only directors of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust for a short time. Those who have come before and those who will come after live on Egg, are committed to Egg, and see their future and that of those that they hold close on Egg. The rewards of Egg stewardship are shared, and so too is our responsibility. Isn't that what community ownership is all about? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy and Maggie. That was absolutely brilliant. And as before, it's always good to be reminded of all the amazing things that you've done on Egg for such a small community, and such a lot of challenges in terms of your connections and berries and weather and COVID. And you're always all still so inspiring and enthused when I speak to you all. It's really amazing, and there's some fantastic lessons there for some of our newer landowners to share. So thank you again to Lucy from the Caledonian Canal and Maggie from Egg. We're going to move on now to our panel discussion, which is going to be chaired by Agnes Rennie from Galston. I'll let Agnes introduce the panelists. We're running slightly over, Agnes, so I'll expect your usual efficient management of events. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ailsa. Now there's a challenge if ever I heard one. Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm a bit choked, I must say, having listened to these presentations this morning. All of them, I have to say, have just been, in their very different ways, really reinforcing what we're about and really reinforcing what we're about today. So the panel. Well, we've got 4 people with us today who come at this topic from their own very individual perspectives. So rather than me trying to sum up what they do or what they feel they want to bring to the table today, I've asked them each to introduce themselves. So first of all, I'm going to start with Caitlin.
Hi everyone. As Agnes said, my name is Colin Mcneill. I'm from the Isle of Colonsay. And I've been working with the Colonsay Community Development Company since I was about 21, so a few years now. I'm currently a final year law student at Stirling. Housing has always been the priority on Colonsay since the inception of the development company, ever since kind of around 2000, when Colonsay Estate, who's still our major landowner, decided they were no longer going to focus on providing residential lets, which had previously been the majority. In 2006, we got our first taste of community land ownership, and we purchased 2 plots of croft land, and we split them into 5 community-owned crofts, which are all currently tenanted with 5 families and 7 children between them. This year, we've managed to increase our community assets significantly with a substantial land purchase for the development of affordable housing, as well as the purchase of one of our church manses. All going to plan, we should have 14 houses going up on between the 2 projects on 2 pieces of community-owned land. And the goal for us at the moment is to repopulate. We really must bolster the sort of working age community in order to sustain us in the long term.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. That was well done for your minute. Moving swiftly across to Martin Avila, who's with me on the board of CLS, but coming at it from another perspective. Martin.
So I'm Martin, and I'm the director of the Cunningham Park complex. We are a community landowner in Glasgow. We own an old Victorian school building as well as another small building next door, and we are a centre for citizenship, creativity, social enterprise and well-being. And really what we seek to do is to bring the community together, to create a place where they can come together and work together to improve the lives of the people that live in and around Cunningham Park.
Thanks very much, Martin. And Megan McInnes.
Thank you, Agnes. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I suppose I wanted to bring 3 things to the conversation this morning. The first is in my role as the Scottish Land Commissioner, to talk a little bit about the work that the Scottish Land Commission is doing because increasing the area of land and assets under community ownership is one of our core goals. I also wanted to reflect a bit on my own personal experiences of growing up, firstly on Skye and now living in Applecross, both places where a small number of large landowners own most of the land, and how important it is for communities to be able to take on the ownership of that land and achieve their own development objectives. And then finally, I also wanted to maybe echo some of what our Cabinet Secretary said in her speech this morning about the huge admiration, respect and interest there is around community land ownership, the community right to buy and Scotland's land reform journey internationally. and particularly focusing on the work of Community Land Scotland, because there's a huge amount of interest there, and I hope that we find ways after COVID or even now to be able to sort of showcase and demonstrate what it is we're doing internationally. Thanks, Agnes.
Thanks very much, Megan. And the fourth member of our panel today is Colin Mcleod, who's the Policy Director at CLS.
Thanks very much, Agnes. Yeah, I'm Colin Mcleod. I have a dual island nationality identity. I grew up in Skye, but I'm really a Herach from the Isle of Harris. Half my day job, I suppose, is taken up as a policy director for Community Land Scotland. The other half of my time, broadly, is involved in doing work with communities that are aspiring to take ownership of land and assets. So it's really interesting from my perspective to be engaged in some of the policy work, clearly, that Community Land Scotland or the community land movement is engaged in and has been over the last 10 years, but also to see some of the practical dimensions of that in terms of that coming to fruition on the ground with communities themselves.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. And just to remind you, if you do have a question for our panel today, I can't promise that we can take everybody's question, but we'll certainly have a good go at it. Just write in the chat box and we'll try and pick them up. But to get things going, I'd like to ask our panel members today just a very quick question from myself, and that is thinking back to when Community Land Scotland was established 10 years ago. I guess you could say we were very marginal. We were certainly considered as being very marginal. We were on the edge, and we represented communities that were on the edge. That's gone. That's long gone. And now Community Land Scotland has members from across Scotland. So I'd like to ask our panel members how, in that kind of what would have seemed an unlikely situation 10 years ago, how you see that now going forwards, and what is it that links us as communities? Martin, can I start with you? Because you would certainly have seemed an unlikely member 10 years ago. If you don't take that the wrong way, please.
I think what links us all is three things: land, economy and people. I think that the simple answer is that we're all working to improve the social, economic and cultural life of the communities that we serve. The more complex answer is that we are all dealing with the after effects of a system that's prioritised economic and financial development over everything else. Whether we're talking about rural communities that are dealing with the legacy of enclosures, clearances and mismanagement, or places like Glasgow, where those that were dispossessed from the land were forced into horrid conditions in factories and slums, into post-war housing estates where little consideration was given to the life of the community, and now into precarious jobs in communities that have been hit hard by austerity. We are all working together to improve the lives of the people that live in our communities through the democratic ownership of assets in the community and through their direct participation in the ownership and the management of those assets. And I think, in brief, we're all part of the new normal, hopefully.
Thank you very much. I think that very much echoes the kind of message we were getting from the Cabinet Minister earlier on too. Megan, can I move to you?
Thanks. Yes, I mean, I think the new normal, the work of the Scottish Land Commission around community land ownership and asset ownership has really tried to focus on making that a normal way of communities being and living, and a normal way of ownership across Scotland, not just in the Highlands, but very much focusing on urban and south of Scotland. And normal not just in terms of the sort of policy framework, but that it's normalised in terms of the kind of support that communities can get. So it's fantastic to see that support now being available across Scotland. I mean, I think personally from Applecross's perspective, it's you know, like so many other communities, we've really recognised that in order to achieve what we are trying to do as a community, you know, retain and increase our population, have opportunities for affordable housing to address the housing crisis we have, and also have, you know, land available for other business developments and entrepreneurship, that land ownership is critical to that. And so the news this morning from the Land Fund that Applecross Community Company has been successful in its 2 applications for a site for affordable housing and allotments and renewable energy and a site for community woodland is fantastic, because it really lets us begin to get down that path to achieving that and being a full member of Community Land Scotland in terms of owning land as well as owning the assets that we already had.
Thanks, Megan. And Colin, where do you see this?
I think what kind of unites all of us, urban and rural communities that are engaged in ownership, is really that desire to, as Martin and Megan have said, to actually make their communities better, to improve them in terms of their everyday lives. And there's a really strong shared recognition now that the relationship between land and asset ownership and land use is fundamental in bridging that relationship. So that's a very clear message that I think is shared amongst all of us. I think there's also a recognition too that this is ultimately a relationship about power and empowerment. Who's got the power, who they're accountable to, and what they're doing with it. And that's really important in terms of developing the sorts of assets that we're familiar with and have experienced within the context of community ownership itself. But that's far from over. Community Land Scotland was set up, as David said, 10 years ago, when a lot of the impetus had seemed to have been drained away politically from the land reform movement and the community ownership movement. And it was seen almost as a kind of, still portrayed by and let's not forget, there are still many detractors in relation to land reform and community ownership, are seen as very much a niche, geographically specific issue. It's clearly not, and the expansion of it over the last 10 years, the growth of Community Land Scotland as an organisation and of community ownership as a movement really shows how there are incredibly important connections between urban and rural communities, between land ownership and land use, and actually striving towards the economic, social, environmental and cultural benefits that we've seen and communities see every day and demonstrate so very clearly in terms of what they're doing through ownership of their land and their assets. So it's a big, big change in that respect, I think.
Thanks, Colin. Caitlin, quick answer from you on just where you see the links between rural and beyond.
Yeah, well, I think echoing what everyone else has said about improvement for your community, but I think also at a bit more of a base level, it's about security. I think on the island, certainly it's always been very apparent that your life and your community's life was always hanging in the balance, especially if you had a difficult relationship with your landowner. But I think that's been brought into sharp focus in an urban setting as well, with the sort of the issues around Airbnb and whole tower blocks becoming, one in, one out, week in, week out change around. And I think that the thing that community land ownership can offer is security for communities.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. Okay, we have a first question from Ewan Allinson. And Ewan's question is, I'm interested from the example of Egg, whether the panel feels that the creative industries and the arts will become integral to the future of community land ownership, both economically, but also with respect to confidence and belonging. Megan, can I come to you first on that one? And I won't go to everyone for every question, by the way, from here on. So Megan, to you first.
Oh, yes. No, I mean, I think, Ewan, yes, I think there's so much that we all want to learn from what the Community on Egg is doing. And I think the integration of creative industries and arts into these kind of communities is really, really part of that. We were discussing as we were getting ready for the call this morning about the fact that, there's so many in communities like ours where tourism is an important part of the economy. We've had a real increase in local crafts, people and artists producing and making a living off those within communities which are community landowners or on the pathway to doing that, and being able to, having land and ownership of the assets is a really important part, as Caitlin said, in terms of that having the security and the control over your land tenure, but also the future ability to invest, the confidence to invest in your business and be part of that local economy. So I think, yes, absolutely, it's a really important that we see community land ownership as something which is holistic across the board, the sort of broad development aspirations of a community, rather than just simply focused on land itself, because community land ownership is a means to an end rather than an end an end in itself.
Yeah. Martin, do you have a view on this question about culture?
Yeah, I think
Culture, yeah.
it forms part of a sort of diverse approach, both from the economic and from the cultural aspect. You know, they can drive revenue generation, but they can also help vision the future and tell the stories that bring us together. The creative industries have always played a part in the Cunningham Park complex story. The artist studios that we've had have brought in money for the organisation. The festivals that those artists and people within the organisation have put on have brought local people together around a common identity. And artists help drive the creative regeneration and the physical and economic regeneration of central Govan through artists that had been based in the Cunningham Park complex, setting up studios and shops and renovating shop fronts, where once there were 20 odd empty properties on Govan High Street, bringing it down to
Sorry, Martin, your screen has frozen there.
occupancy. And so I think that it plays a... Am I back there now?
Yeah, you're back now, yeah.
Am I back, Agnes?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, it's an important part of a diverse approach, and it has many cultural and economic benefits.
Thank you for that. Another question is, looking at where we are just now, and let's face it, again referred to this morning by a number of our speakers, the world's in a very different place from where any of us imagined even 6 months ago. Colin, can I start with you? What do we have to learn in terms of what community landowners and asset owners have to offer and have had to offer over these months and looking to the future?
Well, I think the pandemic in particular has shown a pretty unforgiving light in terms of the challenges, obviously, that we've all had to face. And I think community landowners have really stepped up to the plate in many instances with regard to responding to the crisis on the ground level within their own communities. And as many people, of course, will know, Community Land Scotland, in collaboration with Community Woodlands Association, produced a report recently, Built-in Resilience, Community Landowners' Response to the Pandemic. And that really did show that because community landowners are these anchor organisations within their communities, they've been able to respond in a very agile, fast way to delivering services, providing support for their communities in ways that have not necessarily been as easily done by other types of organisations. So that is a really important lesson in terms of actually putting the trust and providing resources and also enabling community landowners themselves and asset owners to be at the forefront of that development process and being equal partners in that process as well. There's a bigger issue too, of course, which is the overarching existential issue of climate change and the climate emergency, and having community landowners, rural and urban, able to benefit from the assets within their communities on the land, in the places where they live, is actually really important in terms of delivering public benefits, but also community benefits, whether it's through afforestation, woodland management, whether it's peatland restoration, whether it's renewable energy, but also the broader types of services and support they can provide to enable people to actually address that climate emergency itself. So I think the key message from all that, in terms of the uncertain, turbulent times we continue to live in, is that we need to place communities themselves and community landowners at the centre of how we build back and socially and economically and environmentally renew our society as a whole. So having that as a centrepiece is really, really important. And it's something that Community Land Scotland has been advocating for over the last number of months, of course, and we will continue to do that.
Caitlin, can I come to you from that and segue in, because Callum has raised the climate emergency. We also have a question just come in from Peter Peacock, which has raised just the place of community landowners and the response in taking forward a new beginning, really, in terms of the climate emergency, and a big part, as he says, in the new green economy. Is this something that you've considered?
Yes, definitely. Unfortunately, when I came in as a director initially, we had just had a failed project to start our sort of green agenda. So we've been set back a little bit here, but it is definitely something that's always on our minds, and it's crucially important that, because I think, again, what the COVID pandemic has really brought to our attention is our lack of resilience. I think that when you take tourism out of the picture, we're actually in a bit of a tough spot. And I think that as part of us diversifying the sort of the economy and our infrastructure in general, it has to be looking forward to green and renewable a future for us in order to keep us. Again, it's just about the sustainability. You never know what's going to happen. We never thought we'd be in this position, but we're really realising how at the mercy of our landowners and the situation we find ourselves in that we actually are.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. Question from Lisa McLean, very much of the Times too. Interested in what the panel believe are the current barriers, challenges that might impact growth in the sector. Martin, can I come to you first?
It's always a capacity issue, I think. You know, things like access to capital, things like access to the skills and the knowledge and the resources. It's a difficult balancing act to be able to invest in your community at the same time as growing economic revenue that enables the organisations to sustain. So I think some of the challenges that we're talking about are very complex, and they've not always been solved by folks with more resources. And so I think, you know, where does that leave us in practical terms? I think what we need to do is for those stakeholders that we should be working with, local authorities, for example, we need to see a much more collaborative and supportive approach. We need to see less barriers put in the way of local communities, and we need to see an approach that views local communities as true partners and not, you know, people to be burdened with assets that they couldn't make work, or as folks that they don't have the kind of sophisticated thinking or operations that's needed to manage the assets that local authorities haven't always been able to manage. So I think, you know, capacity is probably the main challenge, and what we need to do is to get those folks that are in the way and creating, you know, drags on the development through placing bureaucracy and burdens. We need them to stop doing that.
Thanks, Mike. Megan, do you have a view on this one?
Thanks, Agnes. I mean, I think the work that the Scottish Land Commission did in the review of community land ownership and the asset transfer scheme back in 2018 highlighted a number of challenges which very much echo what Martin has said, challenges around the funding and challenges around the need to increase awareness. And, you know, although we are a testimony to the fact that community land ownership has become normal in some areas, there's still a lot more to do. So the Land Commission made a series of recommendations to the government, the Scottish Government, but also to a number of different other stakeholders about how those challenges can be addressed. They focused on, for example, looking at some of the alternative funding sources, alternative funding mechanisms, and we've published a paper on that, which highlights some of the ways that communities can think outside the box a bit about getting both support for the acquisition and post-acquisition periods. Looking at also the need for streamlining, and reducing some of the complexity within the community right to buy processes, because we've got a number of different routes now with a number of different constitutional requirements and things like that for community organisations, and it would make everyone's life easier if they could be streamlined a bit more. But also linking up community land ownership to wider planning processes, particularly thinking about how community land ownership links into local place plans and working with local authorities to again streamline the process of asset transfer if it's in the case of publicly owned assets, but also just helping planning departments think again about including community land ownership and local place plans more actively in their thinking. So there's a lot of work I think the Land Commission has done which can help highlight, but also then move forward to find opportunities beyond these challenges.
Thank you, Megan. Callum, I'm going to come to you with this one, and this is from the Mid-Steeple Quarter, who are interested to know if collectively you have any experience of private capital being used in community projects? And I think I'm just going to keep that one with you, Colin, because we are starting to run out of time.
Yes, I think that there are examples of private capital coming through for community projects in different areas. That's a really important dimension of the financing process, because as we know, the land fund is a really important and essential component to support communities, but it's not the only one that's there in terms of developing that. So we need more of that. We need a much wider range of financial sources in order to enable these kind of projects to move forward. And let's be honest, egg is the obvious, very unusual to some extent example of how that's happened in practice. But we need to find a more kind of coordinate, systematic, and actually innovative way to develop these different finance sources in that sense. So broadening that out is fundamentally important.
Thanks, Callum. Question from Neil Sutherland. Affordable and suitable housing has been a significant challenge for many, if not all, community landowners. Do you feel progress is being made, and what are the current constraints? Martin, can I start with you?
I think that this is a question which mainly people would relate to the rural experience, because obviously the accessibility and the affordability of housing in rural communities is very acute. But yeah, I think we've got a long way to go in urban communities as well. I think if we look at social enterprise revenue generation across urban communities, then actually it's the housing associations and people that own residential properties and let them out that generate a lot of the economic value and surplus. And I think what I would like to see is much more community-owned housing by the development trusts and community landowners in urban areas, which would allow them to generate the revenue that they need to invest in other assets. So, I think within an urban context, there's obviously everything that happened with the transfer of housing stocks many years ago, but I think it's yet to be linked up to people who own other assets in a democratic way. So we've went housing to social impact and social investment, but I think we need to go from the other way and look at folks that own other assets starting to also develop housing to generate the revenue that they need, as well as improving the lives of those that live in the community by giving them access to affordable and high quality housing.
Caitlin, can I come to you on this one? Because I can't imagine that this is not an issue both in your community and for yourself as a young person in that community.
Yes, definitely. Well, I personally have experience of the whole being in a caravan, statutory homeless, and that's the reason I went to study law in the first place, actually, because I had nowhere to live at home. But I think that it's really encouraging to see the new Planning Act incorporating aspects of repopulation, and it's good to see that there is a bit more of a tangible refocus towards the idea of rural repopulation. Certainly, I think that my social circles of young people in the Highlands and Islands will say that there is still a long way to go, that there are still enormous difficulties. And I think that the only way through that is for young people to be becoming more engaged with their community trusts and their development companies and with the wider conversation, because it really is us. We have to build our own homes, essentially. We're going to have to be able to do that. And now that the legislation and the Scottish Government are really behind us in that sense, and organisations like CLS are so strong, there's nothing really stopping us except from that grassroots level engagement with our young people.
Megan, can I just touch in with you on that one for just a view?
Yes, I mean, progress is definitely being made, but there are still some very significant constraints in terms of the financing and infrastructure of projects in remote rural areas, constraints in terms of planning. We have these local place plans which are supposed to try and remedy some of that to some extent in planning processes, but they're still very much being tested. I think we also have the kind of parallel part of this, which is less to do with the availability of land, but is more to do with the problem of short-term rental properties, both in urban and rural areas. In Applecross, we have nearly 40% of our houses are second homes and short-term lets. It is a huge problem. where the solution lies, I do not know. I know the government has just launched a consultation. I think it's a 6-week consultation process. So I would really encourage everyone to try and respond to that, because there's some really, from a quick reading of it, there's some very interesting proposals in there that could work both in urban areas and rural areas that might help us move towards that a bit more concretely, because certainly in places like this, we're not going to be able to tackle, you know, to achieve our repopulation and sort of the diversity and sustainability for rural fragile communities if we can't both tackle the problems of access for land for affordable housing as well as the second home ownership question.
Thank you. Well, we're running out of time. I want to come to each of you just with a sign off and a farewell, not farewell message, but a sign off message. Can I ask you for one, if you had one quick message to give a group that were beginning to look at ownership, whether of an asset in an urban setting or a rural setting, what would that be from your own learning over the last number of years? Callum, can I start with you? Make it brief, please.
Very, very briefly, keep going. It'll be a challenge. It's always a challenge, but it is well worth it once you get there, because the benefits are enormous. Back
to you, Megan. I'm taking you as you're on the screen in front of me, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, keep going and talk about the problems you're facing, because we can, you know, it's a good path, and it's the only path that it's a really important path for community development, but there are still some challenges and barriers within the community ownership kind of mechanisms that need to be addressed, and we won't be able to address them if we don't know what the problems are. So keep on talking and learning from each other.
Thank you. Martin?
Yeah, good luck. Well done for coming so far. Good luck with everything that you're going to have to face in the future. And please remember to sign up as a member of Community Land Scotland. We are the radical voice for the land reform movement within Scotland.
And finally, to yourself, Caitlin.
Engage your young people. I think I can't say that enough. We've got the time, we've got the drive, and the earlier people are getting educated in this kind of stuff, the better.
Brilliant. What a brilliant point to end up on. That's our panel. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating so freely with us all today. Over to you, Ailsa.
Brilliant. Thanks, Agnes. Thanks to you for chairing as well and keeping it to time. That's really well done. Some really inspiring things there. And of course, Caitlin absolutely nailed it at the end. Of course, it's about getting more young people engaged because we're all doing this for the future of our communities. So fantastic. All right, we've got now just a short film. Some of the faces will be known to you. You'll have seen them today, and there's some new faces in here as well. So a bit of a story of community land ownership. So sit back and enjoy.
Community land ownership has a long and rich history in Scotland, dating back to the early 20th century when the people of Stornoway and Glendale and Skye bought their land. 1992 saw the Aston Crofters buyout, which inspired the whole wave of community landowners that came after it.
The 12th of June 1997 is when the Isle Heritage Trust became owners of Egg, which was amazing and a huge achievement. But since then, 23 years later, we've never looked back. It's like night and day.
In 1998, the Abreachan community bought 540 hectares of forest and open hill from Forest Enterprise. It's renewed life in the community.
The historic 2003 Land Reform Act gave the first rights to communities to purchase land, and those rights have been built on since and are hugely important in communities gaining control of their own land assets.
On Tuesday 28th September 2010, representatives of the Scottish landowning communities voted unanimously to form Community Land Scotland. We were on our way.
In 2016, after a lengthy discussion at the Scottish Parliament, the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016 was passed. This was an absolute game changer because the UN Covenant moves beyond individual rights to include collective rights, and these are essential for communities. Action Party took ownership of Belfield in September 2017, and we opened the doors the summer after in June 2018. It's been a lot of hard work, but it's great to have it owned by the community and have a feeling that we're all involved.
We finally bought our building in 2019. We've came a long way since a sit-in in 1996 brought the building into community management, but now community ownership means that we can control our own future.
I am so excited for this buyout to go ahead. We were there and we did the count and you could kind of just feel the air, and then they were like, the vote is yes, and all of a sudden like the air lifted and it was like, yes, it's time to celebrate, and it was so wonderful. For people my age here in Wanlockhead, this buyout is extremely important because it's shaping the future of my future kids and my future grandkids, and we are truly doing this for my generation and future generations to come.
I would just like to say to Community Land Scotland, thank you very much for your 10 years of input and support and advice.
It's the best show in town, Community Land Scotland. It's the best thing going.
Not only will they help you and your community, but they'll bring all communities together across Scotland.
Here's to the radical voice of Community Land Scotland remaining in force for the next coming decade.
Happy 10th birthday, Community Land Scotland.
It's been a great 10 years, but here's to the next 100.
Congratulations on 10 years, and here's to the next 10 and way, way beyond. And
Cheers.
Thanks. Yeah, some really strong messages there, and I say, Sky from Wanlockhead, I think her and Caitlin, you're the future of community land ownership, and we need to be nurturing you and providing you with the support to continue the story. So now we've part of our theme today was around bring your own cake, so I hope everybody's bought a cake of sorts. We also talked at the start about exporting some of the ideas of the Western Isles and Harris and Lewis to urban areas. Well, we've got a really short video here where we actually exported the Harris and Lewis weather to Glasgow, and so of us standing in a very wet and windy Glasgow, and the persistence it took to light the candles on these cake in this wet and windy Glasgow is a really good metaphor for the persistence of community landowners. So away you go, Kerry. Well, I'm really pleased to be here for Bring Your Own Cake celebration of the 10th anniversary of Community Land Scotland. It's been a great 10 years, we've achieved a huge amount and there's a lot more to go. Thanks to everybody who's come today. We're going to enjoy this cake here and I hope you're all enjoying your cake now. Well, I was very disjointed there on my, I don't know whether that was the broadband connection at my end or if that was the same everywhere, but as I say, that was a very wet and windy cake cutting. It reminded me of lots of kids' parties on the beach. Anyway, we're going to move on now. We've already mentioned about how we need to look forwards. We've got a great history, fantastic history for CLS and community land ownership, but now what's our future looking like? We want to spend the last 10 minutes or so with a couple of new community landowners. Nith Valley in the south of Scotland and View Park. For Nith Valley, we've got a short video and then Jacob there giving us a couple of minutes thoughts on what they're up to, and then 5 minutes from Grace at View Park, who's got a really truly inspirational story.
Congratulations, Community Land Scotland, 10th anniversary. It's fantastic. So I'm Jacob Kay from the Nith Valley Leaf Trust. Talking about the new passive houses that we built, which we believe will be the first community-owned passive houses for affordable rent, family-sized homes in Scotland. So the timing right now is very important. We're about to do our big press release after a slightly delayed project, but it's a very positive project and they're built and our tenants are in and happy. We have 3 families, 5 young children who've been living in them for the last couple of months and settling in very well. The house is a fantastic asset. It's been a great project. A huge thanks especially to Dumfries and Galloway Small Community Housing Trust as well, who assisted the funding of it from Scottish Government, Rural Housing Fund and Scottish Land Fund, who I have to thank, otherwise I wouldn't be working on it, and it's been a privilege to work on it. Very exciting time. I think with COVID as well, I think I wanted to mention that I see that there's a kind of possibly a new light on a new path due to recent events, which I really believe community land ownership really strengthens the future, to me, the objectives of that type of ownership and the possibilities of strengthening communities and resilience. I think there's never been a more important time to really work in this method. And yep, I'm hoping that the Nith Valley Leaf Trust in these houses kind of in a future kind of direction shows that you can push boundaries, and we've been trying to push boundaries with this project, and I hope we can keep pushing boundaries, and I hope everybody kind of gets a bit of feeling of strength that change can happen, and that this could be a symbol of a new concept or sustainability. So yep, I don't know if I'm taking up too much time or whether the video is ready to.
No, that was great, Jakob. I'm really hoping we can see some of the photos, because they are fantastic, these houses, and I'm sure everyone will be really keen to see what they look like and what you've achieved there. So the first passive houses in Scotland, community-owned ones, it's a real achievement, and hopefully other people will be able to emulate that. So we'll try, Kerry, and see if we've got a chance of getting the video up. And if not,
we can go now with that.
All right, thanks, Jakob.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go, Kerry.
I'd like to introduce you to the Closeburn Passive House project. Built in a small village in the heart of Dumfries and Galloway, the project was commissioned by Nith Valley Leaf Trust, built by Stewart and Shields, and designed by John Gilbert Architects.
When we first discussed this project with Nith Valley Leaf Trust in 2015, we were struck by their determination to achieve the highest standards of energy efficiency and sustainable design. As we moved into the development and planning phases of the project, these intentions were underpinned by evidence of a need for family-sized affordable homes within this fragile rural community and wider evidence of fuel poverty.
The project is built simply, using high-efficiency materials and maximising the use of timber. We've formed a simple terrace, finished in larch and render, with a hint of colour. This reflects the village and rural setting. The interiors are bright and light, and there's views to the hills from the main windows.
In the future, it means that our young people can stay. It means they can send their kids to our school, use our shop, and take part in all the activities, like the gala, that we run at the moment. So for us, passive houses really work.
For our organisation, this is an incredibly important project in terms of demonstrating what community-led housing can achieve, particularly within the context of available funding, and in particular the Scottish Government's Rural Housing Fund and the Scottish Land Fund, and we hope that it will form a benchmark for future projects.
Great, thank you for getting that going, Kerry. Yeah, that was really good to see those houses being built and people and young families living in them. Right, over to our last but absolutely not least speaker, Grace from View Park. Grace has been involved in a really great project, which took a lot of imagination, I imagine, at the start, Grace, to get this off the ground, but you've got a great community spirit and support there. So I wonder if, given time, perhaps if you could just give us a couple of minutes of, you know, what you've enjoyed about the project, and what some of your challenges have been, because I think you've achieved such a huge amount. So I'll pass over to you, Grace.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. In 2001, youngsters came to the door and said that they were going to build in the local glen, as the youngsters in our area call it, and nobody would listen to them, and it was their play area in their green belt. So we then took on the problem of saving it. It took us a long while to save it, and then through the community right to buy, we actually were delighted that we were able to put in for the community to own it. Owning it was the only way it was going to make it safe, because every month or every couple of months there was another wee bit getting planning permission or putting in for planning permission, and we had enough industrial area round about us. So lo and behold, we got the Scottish Land Fund to buy it, which astounded us. As I have always said, be careful what you wish for. We thought, oh, we've done it, and then we realised we haven't done it. This is just the beginning of it. Now we have to do the project and bring it to, you know, to the people. So we've done community consultations and asked the community, what do you want in it? So we've done 2 very large ones of those, and we have gone with what the community wants, because it is the community's land. We engaged with Community Enterprise as a consultant, who came up with very, very good paperwork for us to go along with the plan that we were giving to them. And it gave us a project. Whenever the project turns in, a plan turns into a project, that's when your dreams come true. So we've only had it for a month. We've only paid for it for a month. We've had it for 2 years under license, but we weren't allowed to do anything. With the COVID hitting us, it became very awkward, because you weren't allowed gatherings, but the locals use it as they're exercising. We have a cycle lane right through it, and they're cycling, jogging, walking, and it's busier than Sucky Hall Street. So the people have discovered it again, and there's not an awful lot more enthusiasm about the area. So we're hoping that over the next couple of months, after the COVID's fixed out, to use it for the mental health of the area, so that they can get out and get over the lockups and the depressions and everything that comes along with the problems. Engage with the local schools and the local groups for running, walking, jogging, cycling, and also to use it for just somewhere where the children can go and be free and learn what it's like to play out in the dark and the muck again. We're hoping to have picnic areas and fishing areas, but we were careful and we picked good partners like Central Scotland Forest Greening Network to give us advice on our forests, and we're working with other people who have got the expertise, and we've been very lucky in our partnerships with them. But the best one was yourselves, helping us network with other groups who were through the same, and they gave us very, very good advice, and it was lovely meeting them all at the different community gatherings that we went to with you, and realising it can happen. It wasn't pie in the sky, and they were just people like us. They weren't fancy people, they weren't rich people, they weren't, you know, they were ordinary community people, and that's what it's all about, the community owning the land to do the best for the community. We've got a terrible lot of lovely history here that's never been discovered. We've got lovely fields, we've got lovely wildlife, and it's all going to be on show for the community and anybody that wants to come along. As I say, it was a shock whenever they said you could buy it. There's the money, go and buy it, and now it's the hard work. We have very limited things to it that we can do now, but we're working on the health and safety to make it up to the standards that you have whenever you invite the public in. And our volunteers, I have to rein them back in now and again, because they're so wanting to get on with it, and you're saying, well, you've got to walk before you can run. And that's where we're at just now, developing some of the ideas, putting the roofs on the stables, trying to do the information and the tea room up so that people can come and visit and then go for a wander. We hope to have cycles to hire out, but if anybody just wants to come and hug a tree, they're very welcome. It has really been good.
Brilliant, Grace.
Pardon?
No, I was just going to say, I really like it. It's just people like us, and that's exactly what it is. People like us who are just And I come back to what Lucy said at the start in the egg presentation. It's because we love where we live and we want to build better places and we want to build stronger communities, and we love and believe in what we do, because we all know we go through a lot of aggravation and heartache sometimes. And I think that what you're saying there in terms of how the kids first came and knocked on your door, and what happened on Egg, even though you're at two ends of the landowning spectrum in terms of sort of asset and that your time, it's exactly the same connection. I think that's what's been really strong for me today, is that it is that same theme that's running through, has run through the last 10 years. So thank you, Grace, for that short insight. And I'm sorry, I could always listen to you for hours. It's like listening to Maggie Fife. They're always such great stories. But we did say we would finish at 12 o'clock, and I note it's 12 o'clock now. So we did have a final last what next for community land ownership. I think we've covered a lot of that today. You know, from CLS perspective, we want to continue to be that radical voice for communities and to push for further land reform. We're doing a lot of work at the moment on a policy manifesto that Callum's working on, and we'll be sharing that with our members shortly. We really want to see community landowners build on their fantastic response to COVID and make sure they've got the support and the resources to do that. I think we're all keen to see further diversification of land ownership to ensure that Scotland's land is used for the benefit of all of us and not just for the few. And that's going to continue to include addressing the cause and impacts of monopoly land ownership. And again, Callum will be having something to share with members soon on that. We also want to work with others to look at the way that land and assets are valued, because in lots of cases we don't think that's very fair, especially in relation to community purchases. We need to be working towards a much more level playing field, and that could involve elements of tax reform. And finally, it's about putting communities at the heart of addressing the other big emergency of our time, climate crisis. How are we going to mitigate climate change? How are we going to move forward with building a greener Scotland, and how communities need to be at the core of that. So we've got lots to do. We know our members have got lots to do. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming today. Special thanks to the speakers and the contributors. It was great to hear from everybody. We hope you've enjoyed our small celebration. We're really sorry we couldn't be together. We've really loved putting it together, particularly the video. And we look forward to seeing you all, hopefully at our conference next year, somewhere warm and sunny like Harris or Kinning Park, hopefully somewhere like that. Okay, great to see everybody. See you all again soon. Thank you again.